Imagine you're sitting in a tank. The vehicle weighs over 60 tons. Layers of armor surrounds you and you could hear the engine blaring. Outside, artillery shells, machine gun fire, and anti-tank weapons pose serious threats. But that's expected. Tanks were designed for war. They've survived battlefields for over a century. Then something weird happens. You hear a small buzzing sound just overhead. At first, it's barely noticeable. Then it gets louder, you look up and see it headed towards your position. All of a sudden, your tank is destroyed. Not from a missile launch, not from an attack helicopter, and not even from another tank, but by a machine that in some cases costs less than a motorcycle. If that sounds crazy, that's because it probably would have sounded crazy maybe a few decades ago. Yet today, videos like that appear constantly. Smaller drones destroying armored vehicles, drones hunting artillery, dropping explosives into trenches, acting as scouts, spotters, and precision airstrike weapons. The modern battlefield looks like something military planners didn't fully anticipate, and that raises an obvious question. If drones are so effective, why isn't the entire US military built around them? Why are there still tanks, fighter pilots, and soldiers on the ground? Why spend billions of dollars on an aircraft when a relatively cheaper drone could accomplish the same thing? At first, the answer seems pretty simple. The military is slow, resistant to change, and bureaucratic. These are popular explanations, but mostly wrong. Because if there's one organization on Earth ready to adopt technological change, it's the military. And militaries don't ignore winning strategies for very long. History shows this. When machine guns proved effective, armies adopted them. When aircraft proved useful, militaries built their own air forces. When radar changed warfare, nations raced to develop them. The US military isn't refusing to use drones. In fact, they're using a huge number of them. The real question is why the drones haven't replaced everything. And to answer that, we need to first understand why drones seem so revolutionary in the first place. Because in many ways they are. For most of military history, projecting power meant putting other people in danger. If you wanted to gather intelligence, you sent scouts. If you wanted to gather aerial reconnaissance, you sent pilots. If you wanted to attack targets, you had to send soldiers into a battlefield. Drones changed that completely. For the first time, military forces could place sensors, cameras, and weapons directly into dangerous environments without immediately risking human lives. That advantage alone is huge. Imagine being a military commander planning an operation. Would you rather send a pilot worth years of training and millions of dollars, or an unmanned aircraft? The answer is pretty obvious, and that's exactly why drones are so popular. Initially, drones were focused on surveillance. They weren't meant to attack targets, they were meant to observe. They provided information, and information wins wars. The commander that understands the battlefield has an advantage over the rest, and drones made that understanding easier. Now, military forces could watch roads, monitor enemy positions, track movement, gather intelligence for extended periods of time. Unlike humans, drones don't get bored, they don't get tired, they're pretty much flying cameras that never need to sleep. But surveillance was only the beginning. Eventually, drones started to carry weapons. And this is where things get kind of interesting, because now drones have introduced a whole new economic reality to warfare. Usually, military weapons become more expensive as they become more capable. Fighter jet costs millions of dollars. Advanced missiles cost huge amounts of money, and modern military equipment often carries big prices as well. Then drones came in the picture. All of a sudden, relatively expensive systems could perform missions that previously required much larger investments. This created what military analysts sometimes call an asymmetric advantage. A relatively cheap system now threatens a much more expensive one. Imagine spending millions of dollars on a military vehicle only to have it lose to something that costs a fraction of the price. That's not a situation military planners enjoy, but it keeps happening. This is one reason drones attracted so much attention. They fundamentally altered the economics of warfare. For decades, military power are often correlated with expensive hardware like ships and aircraft. Drones introduced a different possibility. Maybe smaller, cheaper, smarter systems could achieve the same thing. That's an idea that sounds almost revolutionary, and in some ways it was. Recent conflicts have reinforced this perception. Videos of drone strikes spread fast online. People watch tanks be destroyed from above. They watch drones maneuver into positions that would be difficult or dangerous for traditional systems. The videos are dramatic, and every new video seems to reinforce the same conclusion. The future belongs to drones. At least that's how it appears. But appearances could be deceptive. battlefield footage could create illusions. We usually see the successful drone attacks. We don't really see the countless failures, the loss of communication, the jams, the crashes, the drones that never even reach their target. This creates a distorted picture of reality. Imagine judging aviation based solely on the successful landings. You never see the maintenance, logistics, or engineering behind how aviation works. And drones are similar. The successful strikes are the only visible part of a much larger system. And that's where the story starts to change, because while drones are undeniably powerful, they also have limitations. Limitations that become more apparent as military planners start to ask critical questions. Could drones actually replace military systems? At first glance, the answer seems to be yes. Why risk pilots? Why risk soldiers? Why build expensive equipment only for it to be destroyed by smaller systems? The logic seems sound, but warfare has a habit of exposing weaknesses. Every new technology seems capable of replacing the one that came before it. Then reality steps in. Military systems rarely disappear, they just evolve. And that brings us to one of the biggest misconceptions surrounding drones, that warfare is just about destroying stuff. Destroying targets is important, but war involves a lot more than that, like communication, logistics, and supply chains. And we'll see that a lot of these tasks are a lot more difficult to automate than people realize. In fact, some of the biggest obstacles facing drone warfare have nothing to do with weapons at all. They involve physics, engineering, energy, and communication. And also one pretty simple problem: what happens when the enemy fires back? Because drones might look unstoppable in the videos, but the battlefield is full of organizations trying to counter them. And that's where the story becomes a lot more complicated. By now, drones sound unstoppable. They're cheap, effective, and they don't require a pilot. They gather intelligence, deliver weapons, and perform missions that would have been impossible a few decades ago. So why isn't the Pentagon replacing everything with drones? Because every new technology is unbeatable until someone actually counters it. And the second that happens, the conversation changes. To understand why, imagine operating your own military drone. You're thousands of miles away from a battlefield. The drone is flying to its objective, the cameras and sensors are working, everything is operating exactly as planned. Then all of a sudden the feed cuts out and communication is lost. In an instant, a sophisticated military device becomes trash. This is what's called electronic warfare, and it may be one of the biggest reasons the military isn't entirely built around drones. When a lot of people think of warfare, they think of bullets and bombs, but modern warfare includes a battle no one can see. A battle fought using radio waves, signals, data, and information. Because drones depend on something tanks don't: communication. And if the radio in a tank cuts out, the vehicle still continues to operate. A drone can't, at least not to the same degree. This creates an obvious vulnerability. If an enemy tank could disrupt communication, they may be able to disrupt the drone itself. And military organizations around the world are investing heavily in exactly that capability. GPS jamming is one example. Many drones rely heavily on GPS navigation. The concept is simple. Drones receive signals from satellites, and that calculates its position. Without GPS, navigation becomes a whole lot harder. And unlike destroying a physical target, jamming GPS can be surprisingly expensive. Imagine spending tens of thousands of dollars developing this sophisticated drone only for someone to interfere with the signals it depends on. Every new capability creates a new countermeasure. Every advantage opens a vulnerability, and drones are no different. In fact, drones might be more susceptible because they rely so heavily on electronics. A fighter jet can still fly without navigation, a tank can still move, infantry can still operate. Drones often depend on complex networks of sensors, communication links, and navigation systems. Remove enough of those systems and performance begins to suffer. This doesn't make drones useless, far from it, but it does make them seem less magical as they sometimes appear online. And electronic warfare is just the beginning, because drones face a bigger problem that no amount of artificial intelligence could ever completely solve, and that's physics. Physics puts limits on everything. It doesn't care how much funding you have. And this includes drones. Take battery life, for example. Most people have first-hand experience with battery limitations, whether it's your phone dying or your laptop needing a charge. Imagine the same problem, except your device is flying through the air, carrying cameras, sensors, communication equipment, and potential weapons. All of a sudden, energy becomes a serious challenge. Small drones usually have relatively short flight times. Bigger drones can remain airborne longer, but this usually requires bigger systems, more fuel, more complexity, more costs. Another limitation is range. People often imagine drones operating everywhere simultaneously. Reality is less convenient. A drone has to travel to its target and remain operational. complete its mission, and return back. Every additional mile creates challenges. Communication becomes harder, energy requirements increase, logistics become more complicated, the battlefield less forgiving. This is a reason military planners prefer traditional aircraft. A fighter jet can travel long distances at high speed. Many drones can't, or at least not without making trade-offs. And trade-offs are everywhere in engineering. You want more range, you need more fuel. You want more fuel, you need a bigger aircraft. You want a bigger aircraft, then you get to a point where this small drone looks more like a traditional aircraft. The problems keep coming up, and then there's payload. One of the reasons tanks still exist is because tanks carry significant firepower and endure punishment that would destroy smaller systems. Drones could for sure destroy tanks, we've all seen it. But destroying a tank and replacing a tank are two very different challenges. A drone can attack a target. A tank can attack a target, absorb damage, move across difficult terrain, support infantry, and maintain a physical presence on the battlefield. Those are not the same mission. This distinction is important because often when having these conversations around military technology, we find ourselves comparing two different jobs. It's like comparing a motorcycle and a semi-truck. Both are vehicles, both move cargo, but one is clearly better than the other at certain tasks. Military systems work the same way. Drones excel at certain tasks while traditional military systems excel at others. The goal isn't necessarily replacement, it's effectiveness. And effectiveness depends on context. Which brings up maybe the biggest misconception about modern warfare. The idea that wars are won simply by destroying military equipment. They're not. Wars are won by controlling territory. And controlling territory is pretty difficult. Imagine a drone successfully destroys a military position. Great. Now what? Who secures the area? Who secures the building? Who establishes supply routes? A drone could help achieve some of these objectives, but not all of them. This is why infantry continues to matter. At some point, someone has to physically exist in the environment, and that reality hasn't changed despite the advancements in technology. In fact, military history continues to show a frustrating reality. New technologies change warfare, but never eliminate the human involvement entirely. Each new technology just became part of the larger system. And drones are following the same path because they're transforming warfare, but transformation isn't replacement. And understanding that may be the key of understanding our initial question, because the future of warfare probably isn't humans versus drones. It's likely humans working alongside drones. The challenge is figuring out exactly what that future looks like. And that's where things get pretty cool.